Friends, painting and weathering armor models is awesome. That's why we enjoy it, right? But there's a way to make them look not only well used, but also lived in by the crew. And that's where the magic of stowage and other small details comes in. Another day at the workbench, another modeling session, another good time. Coffee is a must. Cheers, by the way. And this video will be all about these various bits of equipment, especially their painting and weathering. Some of them are glued to the model, others are left removable for easier handling, and I think we'll add something interesting on the sides, but let's take it one step at a time. Let's start with stuff that can be airbrushed. Leaving various details removable makes painting infinitely easier, but it's not always possible. For example, this jerry can is tucked between various other pieces and wrapped around with a blanket, so it's pretty much a part of the tank at this point, and that only means one thing: masking. The tank was painted using the post-shading method, so using the same approach on the stowage will give the whole miniature a more consistent look, but apart from that, it's just a nice way to add lots of interest to pretty much anything. Okay, now we won't need the mask anymore, thank goodness, because I'm not a fan of masking at all. Speaking of not masking, the other canister is designed for water, and that means a white cross. I sprayed it with a generous coat of chipping fluid and then I airbrushed the cross freehand. Chipping fluid acts as a liquid mask of sorts, because it allows us to easily remove overspray, create sharp edges, but it's most useful for creating chips and damage in the paint. So this approach kinda takes care of everything at once. The result is quite okay, and it didn't require tedious work with masking tape. Moving on, the ammo crate was airbrushed with a mix of green and dark yellow, and same as before, it was heavily post-shaded. I kept adding more and more dark yellow into the mixture because I wanted a fairly pale finish. The part just looks more faded and more three-dimensional, sort of, and it'll make the upcoming weathering steps easier. But there's another thing. The crate is from a resin set from Plus model, and it comes with decals. What a way to add fine detail to a piece of stowage, right? And here's the trick. If the green color was too dark, the decal would be barely visible. Also, because the paint dried to a glossy finish, I didn't have to use any decal setting solutions, just tap water and a light coat of VMS flat varnish gave the crate a more realistic, flat look, blending the glossy decal with the green finish. Another good use for the airbrush is on spent ammo shells. These come from a Voyager photo etch set for the Jagdpanther and they're turned from brass, so they have the perfect color from the get-go. Exhaust Soot from MRP is a paint I bought a long time ago and this is the first time I'm using it, and it's extremely translucent. But the effort was totally worth it. They now have a subtle dirty patina. The inside can be painted with black or very dark grey acrylic paint, and that's pretty much it. Brass shells are excellent for quick, good results. Let's get back to decals one more time. Fire extinguishers have some warning labels, but these are never included in the kit. There's a good set from Alliance Model Works, although some of them are too large for 1/35th scale extinguishers. But this one, however, fits there perfectly, and it's one of those, super tiny details, but the type you notice immediately. A quick coat of flat varnish and it's one with the rest of the model. Alright, now we have all the airbrush-able details ready for weathering, but there are still a few pieces that need to be brush painted. First is the triangular oil canister, and here I'm going for a very simplified zinc-plated finish, starting with the light grey base coat. This is a resin piece from Panzer Art, and it gives us a good opportunity to add a splash of different color to the model. The texture will be painted with a significantly lighter tone of grey. This was an interesting experience because subconsciously I wanted to blend the texture. It just felt unnatural, but this is pretty much what we see on zinc-plated metal, right? The final layer was almost white, and the brush application strongly reminds me of the stippling method often used on figures. but this is much messier of course. To finish it off, I added a stripe of red. Normally, at least from what I've seen, there was a blue stripe with a label saying oil, but I purposely went for a red color to offset the cold, bluish-gray tones on the jerry can and the fire extinguisher. Some very simplified and totally rushed chips finished the base coating, and we'll get back to these parts in a moment with oils and enamels. More mixing on the wet palette, and this time it's gonna be a light tone of field gray. Some quick brushwork and the machine gun ammo canisters are ready for weathering. Or are they? Well, the truth is, even more texture can be added to these pieces in the form of chipping. This is the first layer of light, superficial chips, which will create an outline for the darker tones. Just a bit lighter color than the base coat. Same with the jerry cans, but even though these were airbrushed with Tamiya acrylics, the chipping is painted with Vallejo paints. Just a mixture of black and white, it's very simple. And just like one would do on a tank model, dark steel chipping will finish the job. Painting such fine effects is infinitely easier if the parts are not glued to the tank. But if they're integrated into the model like this, let's say stuck inside a storage bin wrapped in a tarp, there's just no other way. The final chipping color will be Iraqi sand, although the name is very deceiving, it's a perfect tone for wood. Here it's not just about the obligatory chipping effects, but also as a means to show some wood grain texture in the individual planks. Looking back before the crate was even painted, I probably should have added the texture with a hobby knife or a razor saw. Oh well, duly noted for any future projects with these boxes. Lastly, the hinges were picked out in a medium grey color, again mixed from black and white. This will serve as a base coat for rust washes. Alright my friends, now we have the hard bits ready for weathering. Not hard because they're overly difficult, but hard because they're made out of metal and wood. When you think about it, painting each piece is like painting a model, and the weathering will be no exception. Starting with a pin wash made from oil paints. These were left on a piece of cardboard for roughly 3 hours. Oil paints flow perfectly into every crevice and panel line, outlining details and creating fake shadows. The only downside is their greasiness, that's why they have to be left on a dry palette for a few hours. They also blend more smoothly compared to enamels, and this can be used to add subtle weathering and stains of dirt. In other words, the pin wash doesn't have to be cleaned up perfectly. Rust effects are another type of wash, although this time it's not used to outline details, but to add more of a worn metal look. The options are pretty much endless with stowage. Some pieces can be heavily beaten up and corroded, others can look fresher. It's a nice opportunity to add more variation in a creative way. And let's not forget those hinges. Combined with a medium grey base coat, the rust wash creates a very authentic looking steel surface. Continuing with more enamel treatment, but this time it's all about earth tones. These are the same ones as I used on the tank in the previous video, and the aim is to integrate them with the model, making the entire composition more harmonious. Earth tones are generally a good tool for harmonizing pretty much everything, be it components on a tank painted in different colors, crew member figures with the tank, or the tank with the groundwork in a diorama. The final enamel effect is made with a generic blackish brown color, and it's about simulating stains and streaks of oil, grimy dirt, grease, and every kind of horribleness under the sun. And to finish things off, some subtle polishing with the pencil will add nice metallic sheen to worn edges on the metal parts. Okay, that concludes the part about hard stowage. And when you think about it, a bunch of simple accessories such as these can be turned into small modeling projects on their own, with the same painting and weathering techniques like we use on our tanks. And now it's time to paint the soft stowage, aka tarps and blankets. Well, here's the thing. Instead of focusing on every single tarp on this model, we'll take a look at just one to see the basic approach. The main reason I'm painting the entire stowage after the tank itself is finished is, weathering. Specifically, on my previous models, I painted everything before the dust and mud layers, except the T29 if I remember correctly, and it wasn't easy to keep the weathering controlled, especially on tarps. So my idea was to paint them as separate units, completely independent from the tank. I wasn't sure what was I gonna get in the end, but I wanted to try it out. So here they are, painted completely with Vallejo acrylics, and each color was highlighted either with old wood or Iraqi sand to give them a warm yellowish tint that would be similar to the camouflage on the model. And here's the interesting part, sort of. Weathering soft stowage, or even figures with enamel paints, has one small problem. Once you start blending them, they'll flow into recessed parts, which is awesome on the model or the hard stowage, but it looks very unnatural on tarps. Their material absorbs dirt in a different way than wood or metal, and so it's important to avoid this flooding with blended paint. The result would be all shadowed areas covered up with earth tones, and the entire contrast game would fly right out of the window. In the end, however, I didn't find this approach any easier or harder, nor the results any better or worse compared to the more traditional way of painting stowage and then weathering it with the rest of the model as a single unit. But you'll never know unless you try it, right? Anyway, let's wrap it up with something very special, something I wanted to add to this model from the very beginning. Here's a very thin wire from an old electric cable. It's 0.1 millimeters thick, I guess, pretty much the thinnest wire I could ever find. To make it easier to work with, I annealed the wire with flame. This will make the copper much softer and thus easier to bend, but it will also give it a dark, textured finish which is easier to paint. Now, tanks in Normandy were heavily camouflaged with tree branches. It's a land with lots of forests and shrubs, the well-known Normandy hedgerows, and both German and Allied tanks were absolutely covered with foliage. Germans used wire as an improvised net where they could stick the branches. Allies, for example, used chicken wire. It's often seen welded on Shermans. Well, I've already put some conifer branches on my Jagdpanther from a year ago, but not on this one, just the wire. Because this alone adds enough texture on its own in my opinion. Painting was carried out with live color acrylics. And painting such a delicate thing with rusty colors while a three-tone German camo is chilling on a layer of Zimmerit right behind it is a very interesting experience. But a pointy paintbrush and a lot of patience are always there to save the day. The dark rusty color acts as a base coat and as a shadow at the same time. The lighter tone is applied more sparingly and unevenly. Note how it makes the wire look smaller and less noticeable. It's an optical illusion created by less contrast between the wire and the tank. And hey, why not add an extra bundle, in case their friend Jagdpanther 315 needs some? After this point, I could start supergluing the remaining details in place. The tow cable was painted and weathered along with the tank, using the very same techniques such as chipping, rust and dust. Spent 88mm shells are not stowage, more like junk, but that's exactly what makes a tank lived in. And sadly, although I'm very happy with how the water canister turned out, it just doesn't fit the model in the end, so it'll find its forever home on some other German tank in the future. So, my friends, that was everything I know about stowage so far. Who's been here during the good old days when I had stowage phobia and refused to add anything to a model? Good times, right? But yeah, it's one of the best ways to make your model personalized and more authentic, because that's simply how tanks were in real life, loaded with personal items, useful tools, cluttered with junk and so on. Some more, others less, sure, but there's always something in historical photos. So I'm very happy you nudged me for the longest time until I finally gave the stowage a try, and now I'm always having a lot of fun with it. So thank you. Yeah. But I also want to thank you for watching this video, and I hope it was interesting or even helpful. Another huge thank you goes to my amazing patrons who make this weekly show possible. And again, this was an experiment of sorts, painting the stowage after finishing the model, but At least to me personally, the benefits are very small, if any at all. The Jagdpanther is now finished, and what's coming next is a diorama and figures. I don't know what I'll tackle first, if the figures or a building, if there's gonna be any. But if you wanna know, then you'll find out on my Patreon, because I'm working in advance and you'll find all updates from my work there. I'm posting very frequently, almost every day. And if you just want to see the next video, you'll find it there as well, completely ad-free and right now. But there's even more. These super cool studio photos which you can download in full resolution, some real-life references for dioramas, 3D accessories which you can use if you have a 3D printer, and we can get in touch through comments and DMs. But yeah, I guess that's gonna be it for me for this week. So until the next one, stay safe, stay awesome, keep building models, don't just collect them, and I'll see you the next Friday. Cheers!